Shedeur Sanders didn't complain. He didn't retaliate. But after being pulled from a key play despite a record-setting performance, the silence from the Cleveland Browns was deafening. Deion Sanders, however, wasn't about to stay quiet. He called out the Brown staff for deliberate sabotage, actions designed to shake his son's confidence, damage his prospects, and rewrite his narrative before he could write his own.
If you're into the real story and all the messy twists they don't show on highlight reels, go ahead and subscribe. And if you're sticking around to see how this Browns QB chaos plays out, you should definitely be subscribed.
False stories about Shedeur's intelligence and work ethic were fed to media outlets. And as Coach Prime put it, this wasn't sloppy scouting. It was character assassination. The tactics described weren't subtle. They were strategic. And for Sanders, they revealed something far deeper than a coaching dispute. They exposed a pattern of suppression aimed at young black athletes who refused to conform to the NFL's unspoken rules. Shedeur, through all this, has become a symbol, not of controversy, but of clarity. The more he succeeds, the harder some try to erase it. That's why this story isn't just about football. It's about who's allowed to win and why. This should have been a celebration, a breakout moment. A young quarterback throwing for 364 yards and 4 touchdowns in a single game. That's not just good, that's elite. But instead of praise, Shedeur Sanders found himself at the center of something much darker. A silent campaign, an internal takedown, and worst of all, an outright lie. And Deion Sanders? He wasn't about to let it slide. Coach Prime called out the Cleveland Browns coaching staff with zero hesitation. Not only did he accuse him of spreading false information about his son, he exposed what he says has been a calculated effort to sabotage Shedeur's path forward in the NFL. And when Deion says sabotage, he's not talking about miscommunication. He's talking about a pattern, a systemic effort led from inside the league to undercut a young black quarterback before he even has a chance to rise. Let's be clear, the lies weren't just petty digs or media gossip. They were personal, strategic, and deeply damaging. According to Deion, the Browns organization and select media sources planted false claims about Shedeur's intelligence, his character, his arm strength, and even his teamwork. The kind of claims that are designed not to question talent, but to poison perception. These aren't the kind of things that show up on stat sheets. They show up in boardrooms, in scouting meetings, in draft war rooms, and they stick. It's the classic playbook. Undermine the player quietly, from within, while the outside world only sees the outcome. Missed opportunities, unexplained benchings, and narratives that suddenly shift away from facts. Shedeur wasn't just benched during a key 2-point conversion. He was benched after a career-defining performance. And when Shannon Sharpe is publicly saying the coaching decisions look like sabotage, you know something isn't adding up. The Browns didn't just make a bad call. They made a strategic one. One that, according to Deion, was never about the game at all. It was about control. And here's where the story gets even more serious. Deion didn't just accuse the staff of mishandling his son. He pointed to something bigger. He said what many have been afraid to say out loud, that this wasn't just poor judgment or internal politics. This was systemic. This was racially motivated. This, he said, was a civil rights issue. It's not an exaggeration. If a young black athlete is being systematically discredited based on false information, if his reputation is being shaped by hidden agendas and whisper campaigns, that is a violation. It's not just wrong, it's institutional. Shedeur didn't respond with anger. He didn't drag the coaches. He didn't air dirty laundry. He stayed focused, humble, and faithful. That in itself says everything. Because when your name is being run through the mud, and you keep your head down and keep leading anyway, that's not just maturity. That's strength. That's leadership. Deion said it best. He's watched the league try to break players like Shedeur for decades. But this time, he's not standing on the sidelines. He's calling out, naming names, and demanding accountability. The problem is bigger than one game. It's bigger than one coach or one team. It's about how the system works. How quickly a player can be turned into a problem with nothing more than a few anonymous quotes and a convenient benching. The NFL loves to pretend it's a meritocracy, but this kind of sabotage proves otherwise. Because Shedeur earned that spotlight. He earned that moment. And the response wasn't celebration. It was sabotage. Deion's decision to go public wasn't just a father defending his son. It was a challenge to the entire structure, a demand to stop accepting the quiet, subtle erasure black athletes who don't fit the mold, the ones who speak clearly, move confidently, believe in themselves too much for the comfort of gatekeepers. What Deion exposed wasn't just one scandal. It was the way power operates in professional sports, how narratives are crafted, how reputations are dismantled, and how it's always the same type of athlete who ends up on the chopping block. Let's not overlook the fact that this happened right as Shedeur became the most Googled athlete in the world. He was trending, he was leading, he was proving everyone wrong. And just like that, they tried to change the story. From rising star to questionable prospect, from team leader to difficult personality. And none of it was based on facts. That's the most infuriating part. These weren't critiques based on film. These were off-the-record jabs based on nothing. It's hard not to see it for what it is, a system trying to silence someone it can't control. Because if Shedeur is allowed to rise without compromise, it sets a new standard. One where black quarterbacks don't have to shrink themselves to be seen. One where they don't have to play political games or tone themselves down to be accepted. That terrifies people. So instead, they try to preempt it by twisting the narrative, sabotaging careers, making sure the ones who won't play the game don't get to play at all. But this time, it's not going to work. Because Deion's blowing the whistle, loudly, publicly, and unapologetically. He's forcing the NFL, the media, and the fans to look at what's really happening and decide what they're willing to tolerate. Because if a quarterback who throws for touchdowns can still be treated like this, what does that say about the league? The real scandal isn't just the lies, it's how easily they were believed. How quickly people were ready to accept that Shedeur might be difficult, immature, or not ready. Because that narrative fits a long-standing pattern, one we've seen before and one we're seeing again. That's why Deion's voice matters right now. Because it's cutting through the noise and exposing the truth, not just about his son, but about the machine behind the scenes. The one that decides who's allowed to succeed and who's going to be quietly pushed out. This isn't just a sports story. This is about race. This is about power. And this is about who controls the story. And it's far from over. What do you think? Did the Browns sabotage Shedeur Sanders? Is Deion right to call it out? Are we watching a system unravel? Or is this just the beginning of a bigger reckoning in the NFL? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share this with someone who's been told it's just business, like if you're done with the lies. And subscribe for more breakdowns that don't pull punches. Because when the truth finally comes out, it doesn't whisper. It roars. Let's not get it twisted. This isn't about one game. This is about the power to shape narratives. This is about who gets believed and who gets buried. And right now, Deion Sanders is making sure his son won't be buried under lies. After that monster performance, 364 yards, 4 touchdowns, total command of the field, Shedeur should have been the story. The headlines should have been buzzing about the next great NFL quarterback. Instead, they pivoted. Fast. Suspiciously fast. All of a sudden, the talk wasn't about the numbers or the leadership. It was about his attitude, his decision-making, his coachability. Come on, that shift didn't happen on accident. According to Deion, it came straight from the top, from the Browns coaching staff, from inside the walls of an organization that didn't just mishandle a rising star. They actively tried to clip his wings. And when the benching happened, that was the flashpoint. Shedeur was pulled during a critical 2-point conversion. Not for a mistake, not for poor play, but in the middle of dominating. There's no strategic justification for that. There's no football logic that explains it away. It was a message. And it wasn't sent to Shedeur, it was sent about him. A message to other teams. A message to the media. A quiet little signal. Don't get too excited about this kid. But Deion wasn't going to let that message sit. He did what only Deion could. He said no more. No more coded language. No more backdoor sabotage. No more watching in silence as his son and other black athletes like him get systematically undermined by people who think they can play puppet master with young careers. He exposed the whole thing. The lies about Shedeur's leadership. The whisper campaign about his work ethic. The false claims about his arm strength. Claims that make no sense when the stats are right there in black and white. This wasn't criticism. This was an attempt to undermine. Let's be real. If Shedeur Sanders were a white quarterback putting up those numbers, with that level of poise, the league would be building a marketing campaign around him. He'd already be on billboards. But Shedeur is confident. He's vocal. He's coached by his father, who refuses to play politics. And that's what makes him a threat to the system. Not his play, but his independence. Deion pointed to a much bigger pattern, one that extends beyond Cleveland and beyond football. He said it plainly. This is about race. It's about how talented black athletes are too often reduced to stereotypes when they don't fit neatly into the image that coaches, execs, and media are comfortable with. And when Shedeur broke the mold, the system broke out the blueprint. Bench him. Leak concerns. Question his character. Let the media do the rest. It's a playbook that's been used for decades. We've seen it happen with countless other athletes. The coded criticism. The character doubts. The false narratives. It starts with a whisper and ends with a ruined opportunity. And the scariest part? It works, unless someone stops it. And that's what Deion is doing. Stopping it. Exposing it. Refusing to let the machine run, unchecked this time. He's not just offending his son. He's laying bare the ugly mechanics of how reputations are shaped behind the scenes. He's calling out the subtle racism that thrives in silence. And he's demanding the accountability that rarely comes when black athletes are the ones being targeted. When Deion said this felt like a civil rights violation, he wasn't reaching. He was stating a fact. Because when a system manipulates perception to deny someone opportunity based on race, whether through direct action or coordinated misinformation, that is a civil rights issue. Full stop. This isn't about hurt feelings. It's about power. It's about who has the power to shape careers, and who gets to speak truth to that power. And let's not forget, Shedeur didn't retaliate. He didn't lash out. He didn't go on social media to air grievances. He stayed calm, kept leading, and leaned on faith. His silence wasn't weakness. It was discipline. It was trust. It was confidence in who he is and where he's headed. That's what scares the people trying to take him down. They can't rattle him. They can't outplay him. So they try to control how people see him. That's why this story has turned into something bigger than football. Because now the fans are seeing through it. Now the public is asking questions. Why would a franchise sabotage its own quarterback? Why spread lies when the tape shows truth? Why silence the rising star? And more importantly, how many other players has this happened to, without a Deion Sanders to defend them? That's the bigger question here. Shedeur had the privilege of being coached, protected, and amplified by a father who knows the industry inside and out. Most players don't. Most athletes, especially young black men entering the NFL, don't have someone in their corner with that kind of influence. How many of them were benched for attitude? How many were labeled difficult and never got another chance? How many had the potential erased by a coaching staff that saw them as expendable? That's why this matters. Because it's not just about one bad decision in one game. It's about a system that's been quietly pulling the same move over and over, hoping no one notices, hoping no one says anything. Well, now someone has. And the league doesn't know what to do with that. The Browns haven't made a statement. No one's denying the allegations. They're staying silent, hoping the story dies down. But the silence is its own kind of admission. Because if this were all just a misunderstanding, they'd clear it up. If it weren't true, they'd push back. But instead, nothing. Not a word. That's silence. That's guilt. That's fear. That's damage control. But it's too late. Deion's already changed the conversation. Fans aren't just watching the highlights anymore. They're watching the sidelines. Watching who gets benched. Watching who gets promoted. Watching which narratives take root. And which players mysteriously disappear. And now, Shedeur isn't just a promising quarterback. He's a symbol of resilience, of quiet strength, of standing firm in faith while others try to define you with lies. He didn't have to yell. He didn't have to fight dirty. He let the numbers speak. He let his father speak. And now the truth is louder than the smear campaign ever was. So where does this go from here? That's on the league, on the media, on the fans. Are they willing to accept that what Deion exposed is real? Are they ready to look at how race, control, and silence intersect in professional sports? Are they willing to ask why this keeps happening, and who's really benefiting when it does? Because this time, the narrative didn't work. But what about next time? What happens when the next Shedeur doesn't have a Deion? That's the heart of this. That's why this story won't go away. Because it's not just about one player. It's about the system. And now, thanks to Deion, the system's been exposed. And here's the thing nobody wants to say out loud, but Deion did. This isn't just about Shedeur. This is about control. Control over who gets to rise, who gets the spotlight, who gets the second chances, who gets labeled a leader, and who gets called a distraction. It's not about talent. It's about access, about power, about who owns a narrative and who gets buried under it. And for decades, the NFL has been perfectly content letting that control stay in the hands of select few, coaches, execs, media insiders, many of whom operate in a world where racial bias isn't even acknowledged, let alone corrected. That's how a quarterback like Shedeur Sanders, after throwing 4 touchdowns and nearly 400 yards, can be benched, smeared, and turned into a controversy. That doesn't happen in a vacuum. That's not accidental. That's a decision. And Deion Sanders? He caught them in the act. He didn't just post a cryptic tweet or offer vague complaints. He named it systematic sabotage, lies told by the Browns coaching staff and picked up by complicit media. And for what? To humble a quarterback who dared to be confident? To break the momentum of a young black athlete who was suddenly outshining the team's own plan? That's what this was really about. Control over the future. Because when Shedeur's name started rising faster than expected, when the buzz around him turned into reality, the people in power panicked. Not because he wasn't ready, but because they weren't ready for him. And when you look at it through that lens, every decision starts to make sense. Not from a football perspective, but from a political one. Bench him during the biggest moment of the game. Float quiet rumors to media contacts. Create doubt around his character. Paint him as too flashy, too arrogant, too headstrong. It's not new. It's not subtle. It's the same formula that's been used over and over again when a black quarterback doesn't play the role. But here's what they didn't see coming. Shedeur did play the role, just not the one they wrote for him. He led with poise, didn't retaliate, and refused to let their chaos throw him off. That's not just mental toughness. That's strategy. That's character. And that made them even more uncomfortable, because now they can't point at bad behavior. They can't blame a sideline tantrum. They can't say he brought on himself. So instead, they got to deal with the actual truth. A system tried to destroy a rising star, and his father called it out before it could succeed. Deion Sanders didn't whisper. He roared. And by doing that, he didn't just protect Shedeur. He exposed how far some people are willing to go to keep the gate closed. Let's talk about that gate, because it's real. It's the same gate that forces black quarterbacks to prove themselves twice as hard. The same gate that sees swagger as cocky, that sees confidence as attitude, that sees leadership, but only calls it that when it looks a certain way. And Shedeur showed leadership. But because it didn't come with bowed head and quiet deference, it threatened the narrative. So they went after it. They used the tools they always use: strategic benchings, media leaks, performance spin. And had Deion stayed quiet, it might have worked. The media would have run with the rumors. Shedeur would have been labeled a concern. His draft position might have slipped. The story would have been cemented. But Deion didn't stay quiet. He forced a confrontation. He put every team, coach, and fan on notice. If you think you can quietly sabotage black athletes and get away with it, not anymore. And now we're all forced to sit with the real question. How many Shedeurs have we already lost? How many black athletes were quietly pushed out before their careers ever started? How many were benched without reason, badmouthed behind closed doors, or written off as uncoachable because someone in a headset felt threatened by their presence? That's the cost of staying silent. That's the price of not asking questions. Deion saw it happening to his son in real time. Racial. This is wrong. He didn't go to the league office. He didn't ask for private meetings. He took it public. And in doing so, he flipped the spotlight onto the real issue, not Shedeur's behavior, but the behavior of the people trying to bring him down. Because let's not forget, Shedeur didn't do anything wrong. He played a phenomenal game. He led with faith. He didn't blast the coaches. He didn't lash out at the media. He just kept showing up, kept doing his job, and kept trusting God. And still they came for him. That's what Deion is really mad about. That's why he called it a civil rights violation. Because when you do everything right and they still try to erase you, that's not football. That's a system that's been rigged from the start. This story has now turned into something bigger than any one player. It's become a symbol, a warning, a mirror held up to a league that talks about diversity, but still can't handle a confident, talented, young black quarterback who doesn't play by their script. It's not enough to say, let the play speak for itself when the people in power refuse to listen. It's not enough to ask athletes to keep their heads down when lies are being told about them in boardrooms and newsrooms. And it's definitely not enough to expect families like the Sanders to accept silence as an answer. So what now? Now the pressure's on the NFL to respond, not with a statement, but with action. Now the spotlight is on the Browns, who've yet to say a single word. And now every black quarterback in the league is watching closely, knowing that this time, one of their own didn't go down quietly. Deion drew a line. And on one side of that line is truth. On the other is a machine that tried to erase it. And now that the blueprint's been exposed, there's no putting the pieces back together. This wasn't just a one-off mistake by an NFL coaching staff. This was the kind of targeted sabotage that's been operating in the shadows for years. Only this time, it hit the wrong family. The Sanders name doesn't fade quietly. And Shedeur? He's not some rookie you can bury with a whisper campaign. He's got numbers, poise, and a platform. And most importantly, he's got a father who isn't afraid to burn the whole playbook if it means protecting the truth. You can feel the ripple effect already. Athletes are watching. Fans are talking. Coaches are sweating. Because now everyone's aware of what's been going on, and no one wants to be next in line to get called out. The Browns can stay silent. The league can try to ride it out. But the damage is done. The system's been cracked open, and what spilled out isn't just about one quarterback. It's about how the game is really played behind closed doors. And it's about time someone said it. So what side of this are you on? The side that keeps pretending this isn't happening? Or the side that's ready to demand better for every player who gets written off before they even get a chance? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Like, share, subscribe. Keep this conversation going. Because what Deion did wasn't just a defense. It was a declaration. And now, the league can't pretend it didn't hear him.